Since the news broke almost a week ago that JOANN was filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, there has been a barrage of media coverage, which is atypical because big media outlets don't normally cover a lot that's going on in the world of sewing and crafts. So this has been quite unusual just to see this, but it's been pretty interesting. And I've been monitoring the coverage of JOANN's to see what all of these reporters and media outlets are saying. And I found a few pretty interesting articles that I wanted to go over. So let's check some of these out. So the first one I want to bring up is from Wolf Street, which was this is not quite a huge outlet, but I thought it was a pretty interesting article. So I will bring this up. So this one I thought was pretty, I don't know. I've been looking for stuff that I was like, okay, what's interesting to talk about? And looking for some interesting perspectives. And this one's, it says, brick and mortar meltdown fells another retailer. JOANN Inc. files for bankruptcy 3 years after IPO. And they kind of have a timeline of what was going on with JOANN. The IP allowed the PE firm, private equity firm that acquired JOANN via an LBO in 2010 to dump the shares into the lap of the public in March 2021. It all came together in one fabulous package in the bankruptcy filing today by JOANN Inc., an old line fabric and crafts retailer with about 850 stores in the U.S. It's the stuff we've called brick and mortar meltdown since 2017, during which hundreds of major retailers from the biggest ones on down filed for bankruptcy and most were liquidated. Plus, cherry on top of the cake, it's the stuff we've seen since 2021 in our pantheon of imploded stocks. So JOANN Inc. brings it all together. A private equity firm, Leonard Green and Partners, that had acquired an established retailer and a $1.6 billion leveraged buyout 13 years ago and left the retailer suffocating under the pile of debt that had funded its own buyout. The switch by Americans to e-commerce that then pressured revenues at its brick-and-mortar stores, an exit for the private equity firm via an IPO at peak hype and hoopla in March 2021 that dumped those shares into the lap of the gullible public, followed inevitably by the collapse of the shares that wiped out those shareholders. And today, 3 years after the IPO, the bankruptcy filing that begins the process of transferring ownership of the company from the current shareholders to others, with shareholders getting nothing. JOANN Inc. announced today, after weeks of rumors that it filed for a prepackaged Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and that all outstanding shares will be canceled, and that holders of the common stock will lose everything. They've already lost nearly everything, and that certain creditors, PE firms, and board members will get their restructured company. So this article brought up a lot of good points. The private equity firm purchased JOANN's for about $1.6 billion, then went public. They racked up a bunch of debt and then went public, leaving the debt in the lap of the shareholders. And then they filed for bankruptcy. The stock, which is currently around, I think, 13 cents or 16 cents last I checked, is going to be delisted. So the people that bought the stock are left holding the bag, basically. People are still trading these worthless shares today at around 18 cents. Okay, that's definitely dated now. Down the road, the end users of these shares, when they get tired of looking at that unsellable line item in their brokerage account, will have to ask their broker to remove those canceled shares. The company said today in an SEC filing that it had entered into a transaction support agreement on March 15th with the holders of its senior secured term loan facility and with the private equity firms Green Equity Investors, CFLP, Green Equity Investors, Side CF, okay, a lot of stuff there, and with certain current or former members of the company board of directors, and with certain third-party financing parties that executed jointers there too. It said its Chapter 11 bankruptcy filing would provide for a court-administered reorganization pursuant to a prepackaged joint plan of reorganization. The trigger for the bankruptcy filing was the company's default on two loans totaling $1.06 billion plus unpaid interest. Wow, so they had over $1 billion in debt. The transactions of the reorganization plan would result in all issued and outstanding shares being canceled and extinguished without consideration. Also, I want to know the executives and everyone that got in on the initial IPO. Like, did they sell the shares? Like, what happened to their shares? are they losing out, or did they already like offload their shares? All right, the company becoming a private company that will no longer report to the SEC, its long-term debt being reduced by $505 million. It said its stores would remain open during the reorganization and that employees, vendors, landlords, and other trade creditors would get paid in full in the ordinary course of business. Retention bonuses for executives. 3 executives would be paid retention bonuses in about September 2024, which the board agreed to on March 15th. $535,000 to Chris DiTullio, Executive VP, Chief Customer Officer, member of the interim office of the CFO. $371,000 to Robert Will, Executive VP and Chief Merchandising Officer, and $135,000 to Scott Sekula. I wonder if this is additional to his $400,000 bonus that was reported earlier. Executive VP, CFO, and member of the interim office of the CEO. The DIP loan to fund the company during the bankruptcy proceedings. It has obtained a debtor in possession loan of up to $142 million. The DIP facility will be secured by a super priority lien on substantially all of the company's assets. All holders of its senior secured term loan have been or will be offered the opportunity to participate and fund their pro-rata share of the DIP facility. All right, got it. All right, let's move on here. The DIP facility consists of a $107 million in new money loan terms, $25 million of outstanding trade payables exchanged into term loans, and up to $10 million via uncommitted accordion facility, allowing the company to add loan terms. The brick and mortar meltdown. It has been tough for years being a brick and mortar retailer. JOANN sells the type of merchandise, yarn, fabrics, crafts, art supplies, sewing machines, etc., that anyone can find on the internet anywhere, not only on JOANN's own site, but at countless vendors, including cheap stuff directly from Asia listed on third-party platforms such as Amazon and now Temu. Online, the selection is endless, prices are easy to compare, and it arrives directly at the buyer's home. And that is something that you cannot get by shopping in store. And a lot of people have been reporting issues with shopping online at JOANN's. I've seen a lot of you in the comments saying the orders were canceled, or that you've had issues, or that you didn't get all of your order. E-commerce is a structural change in how Americans are shopping for this kind of stuff. Americans are still buying gasoline, food, and new vehicles at brick and mortar stores, which is over half of total retail sales, but the other stuff has been wandering off to e-commerce. Walmart figured it out years ago and became the second largest e-commerce seller in the U.S. after Amazon and the largest grocery seller. But most of the rest of its stuff at its brick and mortar stores is in slow motion decline. E-commerce will continue to wipe out brick and mortar retail chains and retail properties, and thereby will continue to wreak havoc in commercial real estate as it's done for years. So I thought that was a super just interesting article. And they point out a lot of like kind of obvious things that e-commerce really does seem to be swallowing up a lot of retail sales, and there's not as much foot traffic at all of these stores. So, I mean, yeah, that's something to keep in mind for sure. All right, let me get some water real quick here. Oh, and all of the articles I will be referring to are linked below in the description box if you'd like to check them out on your own and read them. A lot of good resources there. And okay, so another article I saw, this is actually from my former employer, CNN, and CNN doesn't normally cover this type of stuff, so I was like, okay. And they actually have an editorial written by a sewist, so I want to share this with you because I do think this is also worth checking out, and they had some interesting opinions there. All right, so let's check this out now. So this is an editorial. So this is just someone's opinion, basically. And it's written by someone named Linda Gorov. Opinion: once folks like me ditched our sewing machines, JOANN Fabrics never stood a chance. So I won't read the entire article, but I do want to go over some of the key points from it. And this is another good thing to bring up, that less people are sewing now than in previous generations. And I think there are a number of factors that go into that, but you know, this author Linda is saying that, and she she looks to be in her maybe like, I don't want to guess her age, but she appears to be maybe like Gen X, something like that. So it says, editor's note, Linda is a freelance writer and editor living in Los Angeles. The views expressed in this commentary are her own. Okay, so she's saying, I come from a family of Russian, Ukrainian tailors, notion peddlers, plus a milliner or two, and I'm fairly certain my ancestors would hold me at least partially responsible for the bankruptcy filing of a major sewing craft store chain this week. Joann Fabrics and Crafts, founded 81 years ago when my seamstress grandmother still had young children at home, blamed a post-pandemic sales slump for the downturn. The lockdown saw sales of sewing machines soar and stock sell out. But now that we're not making our own face masks or working from home in nearly the same numbers, many of our DIY urges are apparently on the wane, but it's more than that. My immigrant great-grandparents taught their children how to make clothes by hand and machine so well that both sets of my grandparents grew up to own and operate small dry cleaning businesses in Chicago, where they also took in dresses, hemmed pants, and hung drapes. They had the can-do craftiness of people with practical needs but little money. Those sorts of crafting skills used to be commonplace. Parents passed them down, and when silent generation or early boomer parents could not or did not, home economics teachers did. Most people, most women, who attended public junior high schools in the 1960s, 70s, or even 80s learned at least basic sewing skills and could advance them with elective classes in high school. Boys were welcome to attend too, although I don't recall any wearing aprons or thimbles alongside me. Unfortunately, those sorts of classes weren't available to my now college-aged kid who attended public schools from start to finish. She says there was an after-school sewing club, but nothing in the curriculum. Ditto shop class, which seems to be history too. But if cars are expensive nowadays, what's known as fast fashion is cheap, not to mention being environmentally unfriendly. Plus, it's cheaply made, which is the whole point. Catwalk trends mass-produced for low prices are and not meant to last. There are entire retail chains built on that premise. The result is that it can be far cheaper and far less time-consuming to run to the mall and grab something off the rack for yourself or your child than it is to set up the sewing machine and do it to yourself. Add up the hours spent knitting a scarf or crocheting a sweater, never mind the cost of materials, and homemade items have become the luxuries and store-bought ones the bargain. Most people I know don't even mend anymore, and shame on us. So I think she brings up a lot of really good points. Maybe we'll do a poll. How many of you had home economics or shop class when you were in schools? Now, I'm an old millennial, and I actually did have both shop and home economics. I went to high school in the late 1990s. So I want to do a poll here to see who here had home economics class and who didn't. All right, let me see if I can do a poll here because I really want to know how many of you actually had that experience and how many didn't. So, all right, so I'm going to do a poll this is for the YouTube peeps here. Sorry, I can't do polls on all of the platforms, but I can do a poll on YouTube. All right, so we'll do a poll about how many of you had home ec and how many of you didn't. All right, so let me do this. All right, let's do a poll here. All right, let's start a poll. All right, did your school offer home economics? All right, home economics classes. Okay. All right, yes, no, and we'll start the poll. Now, mine didn't. I'm in my 40s, so I don't know about you, but we'll take a poll and then we'll see the results later on in the show. Because I do think that is part of the whole thing here is that, a lot of adults don't know how to sew or craft, and then they can't teach their children or grandchildren. And it's also not being offered in schools. So where are young people going to learn how to sew or knit or do anything? And you see a lot of young people like the Gen Zs and the Gen Alphas, and a lot of them don't even know basic life skills. They can't cook. They definitely don't know how to sew. They can't change a tire. So I do think that's part of an overall trend of not having the same set of skills that your ancestors did. And I do think that's a problem when you see adults not know how to do basic adulting and they think even knowing how to boil water is adulting. I'm oh my gosh, I see people, they can't do laundry, they can't cook. A lot of adults cannot cook. Young people cannot cook. They can't write in cursive, they can't write a check. They don't know how to balance a budget. And I do think that a lot of skills are being lost. A lot of really important skills are just not there anymore. So I do think that's part of a problem. Okay, so let's check out more of the article here. Okay. So she says, personally, I crave this crafting connection to the past, even if I don't have the time or energy to pursue it on a regular basis. I'm slightly embarrassed to admit it took me more than a year to notice that the Joann outlet close to my own home had closed. At the same time, I prefer a simpler sewing store. And it is true, a lot of the Joann stores have like a lot of stuff that's like not great. Like, I wouldn't say they have the highest quality fabric or sewing notions, and then they have all the random stuff that I don't really want either. All right, run in to get thread, run out with just the right shade of blue. I don't want to be bombarded by construction paper, unpainted picture frames, packages of glitter, and glue guns. Sadly, but not surprisingly, sewing alone can't sustain a national chain. Not enough of us seem to do it anymore for fun or necessity. I know less than a handful of people who can even do simple alterations, much less who actually do them. Although I also know a dozen cosplayers who regularly create professional level costumes. Their skills, like their outfits, are otherworldly. My own mom never learned to sew like that or really at all. Not certain why, but I suspect her mother was both too busy running the dry cleaners and wanted more for her daughters than to repair other people's clothes. I'm guessing Grandma also believed that real Americans bought ready-made things rather than making them. Fortunately, my dad's dad taught him and he taught me. When I inherited my great-grandmother's featherweight 221 from the 30s, one of the early portable electrics that somehow still weighed a ton, he's the one who showed me how to work the treadle. He also passed on the old wives' tale that people should chew on thread whenever someone sews a garment or button on them, in order to make clear to the angel of death that they are very much alive, and those were not shrouds, and I do to this day. He'd be so happy to see my daughter, his granddaughter, and some of her Gen Z friends putting down their phones and picking up needle and crochet needles, if not needle and thread. Never mind learning from mom and dad or granddad. The newest generation has the greatest teacher of all time, YouTube with its tutorials or for anything and everything. They learn online, they shop for materials online, and they sell their homemade wares online. It's a good thing, however, traditions get passed down even if it's not so great for business. A really interesting editorial there, and I thought she had a lot of really interesting, thoughts about the existence of Joann's and whether or not like just things are changing and the way people buy things are changing and the skills people have. And even if younger people are learning to sew, they want to do a lot of things online. That's why folks like me on YouTube have done well, because we are teaching people from the comfort of their own homes. They can watch on their iPad or their phone. They don't have to go anywhere. And then a lot of these convenience things have come out, so people don't even have to leave the house, which can be a good or bad thing in order to buy sewing supplies. So a lot of really good thoughts about just, why businesses like Joann's are having a tough time, why brick and mortar chains are having a tough time. All right, there's one more article. This is from the AP here. So let's take a look at this. All right, let me switch this up. All right, and this is more about pandemic, how the pandemic has changed how people do business. Okay. So this one says, Crafts retailer Joann files for Chapter 11 bankruptcy as consumers cut back on pandemic-era hobbies. All right, this is by Wyatt Grantham Phillips. Okay. Fabric and crafts retailer Joann has filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection as consumers continue to cut back on discretionary spending and some pandemic-era hobbies. In a Monday statement, the Hudson, Ohio-based company said that it expected to emerge from bankruptcy as early as the end of next month. Following this process, Joann will likely become privately owned by certain lenders and industry parties, the company added, meaning its shares would no longer be publicly traded on stock exchanges. Joann's more than 800 stores and its website will continue to operate normally during the bankruptcy process. Vendors, landlords, and other trade creditors should also not see any pay disruptions, the company said. Yeah. Wink, wink. Pointing to a deal it struck with most of its shareholders for financial support. In addition to Monday's filing in U.S. bankruptcy court, JOANN said it had received about $132 million in new financing and expected to reduce its balance sheet's funded debt by about $505 million. Scott Sekula, all right, we know who he is, stated that the transaction support agreement marked a significant step forward in addressing the company's capital structure needs. He added that the retailer remains committed to operating as usual so it can best serve our millions of customers nationwide. JOANN's bankruptcy filing arrives amid both a slowdown in discretionary spending overall and during a time consumers are taking a step back from at-home crafts, at least relative to a boom seen at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. Crafts, which did extremely well during the pandemic, have fallen back into slight declines as people find other things to do. Neil Saunders, managing director of research firm Global Data, told the Associated Press, noting that many are now sacrificing these artsy activities to spend money on experiences outside of the house, such as going out to eat or attending sporting events. This puts pressure on retailers with skin in the crafts market, but Saunders added challenges specific to JOANN include the company's sizable debt and rising competition. Rivals like Hobby Lobby, for example, offer lower prices, while casual crafters can now go to stores like Target for ample art supplies and kits, he said, adding that JOANN has also let its specialist-type service slide with previous staffing cuts. That's very true. There is still a place for JOANN, but it's going to take a lot of work to get back into a stable position. I think this bankruptcy was always inevitable, and actually, despite the disruption it causes, it's a very good first step for getting the company back on track. JOANN listed more than $2.44 billion in total debts and about $2.26 billion in total assets in Monday's Chapter 11 petition, which was filed in Delaware, citing numbers from October 2023. JOANN previously went private in 2011 when it was purchased by Leonard Green & Partners for about $1.6 billion. A decade later, JOANN, still majority owned by the equity firm, returned to the public market with an initial public offering at $12 a share. The company was born back in we already know the history, in 1943. So that's interesting. And I do think they saw some very artificial activity back during the pandemic between like 2020 and 2021 for sure. Things were going gangbusters. People had stimulus checks. People were at home. They had time to make things. Plus, there was definitely, I saw it with my own channel. There was definitely a resurgence in sowing interest just because people were making things like masks. So I think they definitely capitalized on that. JOANN's also had that like, hey, let's make a mask program and donate it to hospitals thing going on. So JOANN definitely had benefited from artificial activity during COVID. So the other thing I want to point out is that around, I think it was Monday night, JOANN definitely made some changes to the board of directors. They didn't publicly announce it, but they did announce that they were adding Pamela Corey to the board of directors. She's a turnaround expert and attorney that specializes in bankruptcies. And I did notice that she has now been added to the board of directors website, and they took off another guy, Jonathan Sokoloff. They kind of did that quietly, and I noticed that Monday during the show, because when I was looking at the board of directors Sunday during the live stream, there were 6 board members, including Jonathan Sokoloff, and when I checked Monday, there were 5. Pamela had not been added yet, but Jonathan had been removed, don't know why, and they've since added Pamela to the website. So here is Pamela, the latest JOANN's board member. And it says she's a director of the JOANN's board. She serves as a member of the board of directors of Burford Capital, a global finance and professional services company funding commercial litigation and arbitration, where she sits on the audit and nominating and governance committees. So she's done a lot of things. She has a lot of experience, and she is the newest addition to JOANN's board members. I did read that she was getting paid like $30,000 a month. Maybe they had to save money on her, so they got rid of Jonathan. I don't know. So Jonathan Sokoloff is gone, and Pamela is in, and it says her terms expire in 2025. So she is the latest board member for JOANN's. So still lots going on with JOANN Fabrics, and the fallout has been widely talked about, and there's a lot going on. I'll continue to be monitoring what's going on with JOANN's, but that is the latest.